That joke isn't funny anymore. Available on Amazon and everywhere. Hey guys, welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. I'm your host, Lou Perez, and I'm really happy to be joined by my next guest, Daniel Friedman. He's an author of a series of books. One of them begins "Don't Ever Get Old," about an old detective, and he has a number of he has a new one coming out as well. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me here. Yeah, I'd love to start talking about your series, the "Don't Ever Get Old." The title alone hit me because I just turned 43, and I guess technically getting older, like everyone, I guess.
So it's a series of mystery novels. It's about it was sort of inspired by my grandfather. Actually, when I sat down to write in the first place, I wanted to, I guess, write about a feeling, and I don't know if this is the best way to sell it, but the feeling I was going for was kind of, seeing my grandparents at my dad's funeral, and what that must have been like for them. And so that was sort of the thing that inspired it. And then it ended up being a detective novel. So I've written a series of 3 about this character. He gets older and older, but they're very funny. The first one was nominated for the Edgar Award and the International Thriller Award, and won something at the BoucherCon convention called the McCavity Award. And I got a bunch of starred reviews on the series from Kirkus Reviews and Publishers Weekly. Very good reviews. The second book, he faces off against an old bank robber from his past who he failed to catch when he was working. The guy shows up and he claims he wants to surrender and confess to all of his crimes, but he's got another scheme running. And then the third book is about a case from the 70s, a death penalty case. He put the guy on death row, and now, after the wheels have been grinding for decades, the state is finally preparing to execute the guy, and a podcast is coming on trying to save his life, true crime podcast. So it's about the detective as he's dealing with his own escalating health problems, uh, trying to decide whether he's going to talk to this podcast, and the podcast and the detective uh, going over the case from different perspectives, and slowly reeling out what happens and then what's going to happen as the state moves towards the execution and the podcaster tries to stop it. That one's called Running Out of Road. And then I wrote a historical mystery that's totally different. It involves Lord Byron in early 19th century Cambridge as a college student when he was drunk all the time and keeping a bear in his dorm. But it's also a murder mystery. It's called Riot Most Uncouth. So I got 4 books.
Nice. So for one, it's amazing that one of your novels in particular touches on a subject that I really want to talk to you about, which is about true crimes and the impact on the way society views actual murders, et cetera. But on the Lord Byron front, is it true that Lord Byron had a club foot? Is that
yes? Yeah.
I don't know why that detail. That I don't know any of. I don't remember any of his poetry. I know that he had a thing with Mary Shelley. I know he was a very brave dude who died, I think, in battle, right?
In the Greek, Civil War or War of Independence. Yeah, he didn't die in battle though. He died of an infection and very bad medical early 19th century medical treatment. But he was, doing the research, I kind of concluded that he died, as a lot of great artists and writers do, of bipolar disorder, really, more than anything else. Putting himself in a dangerous situation. And a lot of the bad decisions and crazy things he did in his life can be explained by bipolar disorder, and his mother had it too. And his father abandoned him, so terrible childhood. Interesting character.
Yeah. Well, what first brought you to him?
I was reading a lot of old novels and poetry, and I kind of got into it. And I had this idea that I could take an epigraph from his poems and letters at the beginning of every chapter. And I always write, short-ish chapters. So there's like, 30 or 40 chapters in a 350 page book. and I had an idea that I could get an epigraph from his letters and poems and kind of make it seem like it was pertinent to what was going on in every chapter. And that was kind of a structural thing for the thing. And then I got into that. And that was kind of how that came about. And then I really liked the result. It's a strange book, but the people who like it seem to really like it. So if anybody wants to find or check out Riot Most Uncouth, you might have a good time. It's funny. I don't like to say it's funny because you can't laugh at your own joke, but some people have said it's funny.
And those are the people you want to listen to.
Yeah, smart people have said it's funny.
Yeah. Well, no, it sounds great. I mean, for me, I'm like I went to grad school for creative writing. I've written short stories and had them published in lit magazines, but that feels so long ago because for me, it's such a struggle to sit down and read books. And meanwhile, I mean, you can't see them now, but this whole back wall used to be filled with books. I'm doing some like renovations, and I look back and I'm like, God, what happened to you, Lou? Like 20 years ago, you were devouring literature, and now like it's so hard to get around to reading.
Books have kind of declined as a cultural force. Really over the last decade. There's been, there were some market shifts. I think that they leaned into TikTok very hard. Before that, they leaned into Reese. Before that, they leaned into Oprah. And they really did a lot to squeeze men kind of out of a lot of the spheres. And at the same time, other forms of media were arising, tons more TV than there used to be. I remember, it was really one thing that really made me notice how things changed was during the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings when they were talking about his, teenage years and his drinking. They're saying, well, if he was such a good student, then why was he drinking so much? And it's like, it's impossible to imagine, what it must have been like. Now, probably even for people who were there, but there was nothing to do.
Right.
I grew up, there were 40 channels on cable. When he was growing up, there were 4 channels, mostly playing reruns. There was nothing on TV. You go to the library or you get drunk and high. There were no video games. There was no internet. My little nieces, like, their experience of media is totally different. They don't have any sense of what time is something going to come on TV. They don't have any sense of watching this because there's nothing else on. They pick what they want all the time. There's always new stuff to watch. So, the sense of every kind of media is competing with a market that's like nothing that's ever existed before. And books are a little harder. And I think that in such a competitive market, that's a big disadvantage.
Yeah. And I'm jealous of my wife and my sister-in-law. They kind of have like, not necessarily like dueling book readers, but I mean, they're putting down like a book a week. And a lot of it are these, extended series. I guess, I forget what the one series is, but apparently my wife has a book boyfriend who she's very in love with, very turned on.
Fantasy one?
It's definitely a fantasy one. I think the guy has wings of some sort. So that's what I'm competing with, Daniel. My wife opens up a book and she meets this perfect guy who has wings and is willing, I guess, to die and kill. And then, here I am. But yeah, it's like, with all the options out there, books, the competition that books have is pretty great. Like even when I'm driving my kids around, and we're listening to Spotify, and I have young boys, but they're like really into rock. So they're listening to like music I listened to as a kid, like Alice in Chains and Faith No More and stuff. And I don't have the version of Spotify where, commercial free. So, every like 3 songs, they have to hear a commercial. and they're like, oh my God, what is this? And it's like, wow, you guys don't even know what it was like just to have like, AM, FM, and it was just norm. Yeah. You had to deal with commercials.
I still know like 30 songs about breakfast cereals.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing them, but the one about Fruity Pebbles at Christmas time, we'll never forget that. That's going to be, I'll be able to recall that forever because I probably heard it 500 times. It was the same commercials a lot of the times. Like kids today have no idea that cereals used to have cartoon mascots. Terrible stuff that was terrible for you and full of chemicals and preservatives, and they were selling it to you with cartoon characters. It's an improvement. It's definitely an improvement. But, just the idea that there's nothing to do, the boredom that I think people used to feel. I went to Florence a few years ago, and I was looking at those frescoes, and you think, how could somebody lay on a scaffold painting these tiny details on a ceiling for months? And it's like, what the hell else was there to do?
Yeah.
So they drank. I went to an exhibit there that said the Medicis brought in a retinue of disabled people to laugh at. Yeah, people with deformities, and they had them in the court. Because they amused them. They just, and they brought stuff from all over the world to look at. I guess they just laid on their backs and stared at the ceiling. It's kind of incredible to think about. I mean, the pace of the news seems to have increased, the pace of everything. And I think a book is a commitment for a lot of people. And that's also why a lot of the bestsellers have trended to be more juvenile. The YA type stuff is very popular among adult readers. And it's the culture is fragmented. Since there's so much stuff, everybody's watching something different. So there's not like a book that becomes a cultural touchstone. Like even like the Da Vinci Code, not a great written book. It was very propulsively plotted. I really feel like the last one, I felt like I was reading a book at the same time, like everyone else was reading it and talking about it, was like maybe The Goldfinch. And even that was probably diminished by what a big book would have been, 10 years before. So it's really hard to imagine somebody being Philip Roth now. Just because how do you get the level of attention to have that level of cultural significance writing that kind of work now?
Yeah.
Which is why I write detective novels.
Yeah. And with Roth too, I got to, I went to his 75th birthday celebration at Columbia.
Did you meet him?
You know what? It's such a big regret. After everyone filed out, I was on the street and he exited with, like his small entourage. I don't know if it was like a wife or kids or, so I was, about like, 10 feet away from him, and I didn't go up to just say, at least go up to say happy birthday, Philip Roth. So I missed my opportunity there. But even Philip Roth, like his later novels became significantly shorter. I noticed I'm a big fan of big print. So I love when a book is like kind of fluffy. And you open it, it's like, here are these like big, very easy to read letters. But yeah, he started writing a lot shorter stuff, and obviously the themes were there. I mean, he'd always been the themes of sexuality, male sexuality, have always been there. And then to watch him, kind of contend with that stuff later on in life, being a, as an author, and then his characters too, like being like kind of young Lotharios, and then later on having like the aged Lothario. I forget which book it was, but there was an interaction between the main character and a young woman who was jogging, and they like kind of like passed each other and exchanged words, and him just knowing, had he been 30 years younger, like he could easily take this girl to bed, but now he has to be the the older guy with the enlarged prostate who has to just like fantasize about her and hopefully get an erection when he gets home.
That sounds familiar. I'm trying to think which book it was.
Yeah, I wish I had it. I wish I had the book set up so I could just turn around and look at it. But yeah, well, writing like the mysteries and stuff. When you're writing those, do you first iron out the plot, like making sure that is just like ironclad?
I really think the characters are what's most important.
Okay.
Like the thing I've been working on now, it's a little bit different. It's a departure. It's about a disgraced former New York cop who goes to work in private security, trying to stop shoplifting, and he is assigned a sentient AI as his partner, and so it's like a buddy cop kind of comedy, but with the artificial intelligence as the rigs to the Murtaugh or whatever.
I'm getting too old for this shit. I need to upgrade. It's just
but it's exactly like that. And there's more going on with the plans that the security chief has for the sentient AI and what they want to do with it and what the company's doing. And then also they investigate the shoplifting ring and figure out where that goes. And so I'm really excited about it. I think it's very funny because they have a really interesting relationship. And so what I start out with is the character. I think like, who is this guy? Where's he coming from? Because it's as much about his response to the crime and what he's going to do when he becomes aware of what's going on, that the book is about as much as the thing itself. Because what makes a lot of these guys, going back to all the classics, Raymond Chandler, whatever, heroes is they're walking into other people's problems. So they're like a perspective for the reader who's an outsider, number one, so that they learn about all the stuff as the detective does. But also what makes the detective heroic is that he's putting himself in there when other people would just walk the other way or, not make it their problem. He's making it his problem. He's putting himself in danger on behalf of these other people. When he could easily, in many cases, he's under pressure to not follow up on it. He's offered bribes to not follow up on it, and he has to trace it to the source. He's going to protect people even when it's not in his interest. He's going to, that's what makes these characters sort of heroic, and it doesn't always work out for them, which is, I guess, what makes these the kind of books that they are. So you got to think about who he is and how the reader's going to relate to him. And then you got to think about the AI because like it's got to be off-putting enough, but at the same time appealing enough that people care about what happens to it. And so that's a hard balance to get. And then once you have the characters, then you set them against the problem. And that's really where it kind of puts itself together. And you kind of figure out how the problem's gonna resolve itself. You know where it's going, and then you kind of have to figure out how they're going to get to it. You can't just kind of make it up as you go along because it doesn't make sense. And I don't like it when a lot of people cheat. Like it's something that you could figure out really easily, except that there's a key piece of information they don't give you until the very end, or structurally there's a lot of tricks like that. And I think a lot of readers are fine with them, but I don't like using that. I like it to be honest. I want it to have a twist that surprises you, but it doesn't feel like a cheat. And that's really important. So I do think about the structure and the plot. And I don't necessarily write detailed outlines, but I think about it for a while before I really, put it together. So I have, I guess, an outline in my head when I'm doing this.
Yeah. Have you any of your books made the leap to either like film or series, or have you optioned any of them? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Been optioned a couple of times. It hasn't quite gotten there yet, but we're still trying to place Don't Ever Get Old with the streamer. The difficulty obviously is when you got you need an elderly actor who fits this role, and wants to be the lead in a series. And once you put the cast in place, I think maybe it'll happen. We created a pitch, and I mean, it's kind of been in various stages of the process for a while. I hope it happens.
Hmm.
Uh, it's nice to get that kind of attention, and even if it doesn't, trying to get it there is work. So I would love it if it became a TV show, but we'll see what happens. Obviously, writing novels and you're kind of looking at TV, and I mean, a number of good crime writers have gone on to either be adapted as TV shows or create their own TV shows. So that's something I have an eye on.
Yeah. Well, recently they just dropped the teaser for the Naked Gun, the new Naked Gun. Now, and obviously it's a little different. And I have to I'll let everybody know my two friends, my two longtime friends from NYU and at one time comedy partners, Dan Greger and Doug Mann. They wrote it. They wrote the new one, and like watching the trailer and stuff. And when I first heard about the project, I just think like, what a Herculean task to try to reimagine the Naked Gun films, for one, without the main man himself, but then also, God, how many years removed are we? I forget the last like Naked Gun was like close to maybe 30 years, maybe.
It has to be in the 90s. I was
Yeah.
in like middle school when those were coming out.
Yeah. And it's like, man, what a tough, like they definitely have their, the work cut out for them. And, they're my buddies. So I'm always, rooting for them. We'll see what happens.
I guess they might be even no, I might have been in elementary school. They had to have been the 80s or the early 90s because OJ was in them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was before the trial. And
Holy
the trial was
shit.
1992.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know. Did they make another one without him? Because they made two with him, I believe. And then
He might not have been in the last one, but he was in at least two of them.
Yeah.
And they had to have been before 1992.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Nordberg,
Yeah.
so likable,
OJ.
so likable, dude.
He was very likable until he almost cut his ex-wife's head off.
Yeah. He, and let's not forget about, the other victim, Ron Goldman.
Yeah.
What if, well, maybe we could use this as a way to, kind of transition. So, your latest novel that's out, involves a death row inmate and, one of those true crime podcasts trying to get this guy off, which seems to be what is done now. It just seems like Netflix and Netflix, Audible, and the Innocence Project get together, and they're like, okay, here's a guy who definitely killed somebody. Here's someone who's without a fucking doubt a murderer. Let's see how we can get them off. And so. Did the idea come to you after seeing what was happening, like kind of in the zeitgeist, or were you having this idea beforehand?
So I remember I listened to Serial when it was first airing.
Mm-hmm.
The first season of Serial with Adnan Syed. Are you familiar with that case at all?
I know of it, that it exists, but I never listened to it myself.
All right, so it's been years since I listened to it, but I mean, I listened to it the once. So when it came out in like 2005. But it was very persuasive if you go into it knowing nothing else about the case. They went through a lot of evidence. Basically, he was a teenager named Adnan Syed, and he killed his ex-girlfriend, Heyman Lee. And her family are immigrants, and I don't think her parents spoke English at the time of the trial. He's from a Muslim background as well, so that's kind of part of the backstory. They're both, minorities, the victim in Maryland, and he was arrested for it. His weed dealer testified against him, and then there was cell phone location data. The fact that the weed dealer knew a bunch of details. I think he showed him where they dumped a car or something like that. I don't remember it. I should have looked it up before this, but there were a lot of reasons. There's a lot of evidence against him, and the way that it was put together in the show makes it really seem like there's a good chance that he was innocent,
Hmm.
that he was kind of treated unfairly by the process, that he wasn't well represented by his lawyers, which, every serious conviction, no matter how good their lawyers are, they go back and claim that they weren't adequately represented at trial. So,
Right.
there's not a lot of credibility to that. Uh, I mean, listening to it, I thought, hey, maybe this guy's innocent. And then I went and learned more about the case, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. And then after you see all that, and then you go back and you think about, well, what was in the show, and you realize that the evidence against him was overwhelming that they told you about in the show, and they just frame it in a way that makes it seem like it's not. Uh, the drug dealer knowing a lot of details about the case and saying, "Yeah, he took me with him. I helped him dispose of the body." That's very persuasive, because
Yeah.
how else could he know these details? Uh, and I mean, there are theories. What if it's this guy? What if it's? But it's not. Uh, the evidence against him is overwhelming. And then I believe that the very embattled, now former prosecutor, ended up dropping opposition to his appeal or something, and so now he is out. He served, you know, decades. He went in when he was like 18 or 19, and now he's in his 40s. So, the fact that somebody who killed somebody got out after 25 years isn't the greatest injustice in the world, but he did it. And the fact that people think he's innocent is kind of ridiculous. And then there was, did you see Making a Murderer?
Yeah, and I remember watching that, and I was very taken in by it. And I'm like, oh my God, look what they've done to this guy. And then I read really good commentary from journalist David Harsanyi, who basically admitted, he's like, he watched this and he was like, oh my God, he's like, the filmmakers got me thinking this guy's innocent. And then he's like, wait a minute. here's why it's complete bullshit. And here are the things that they left out.
And even the things that they tell you, they spin them in a way. Like Making a Murderer, here's this guy, right? He is the most depraved, disgusting human being that has ever existed. He's got multiple sex crimes. He's just like, everybody in town knows who he is, and he's terrified. The cops all know who he is. They all know he's trouble. Uh, he lives in a junkyard with his family, who are straight out of The Hills Have Eyes. Uh, and then there's a woman reports getting raped in the woods by a blonde man. So they go and pick up the most, the local degenerate, and they end up convicting him for it. And it turns out that the guy who raped her was a similar looking vagrant passing through the area. So the guy who has done everything else that they thought did this because of all the other stuff he's done turned out to be innocent, uh, and accused of this purely because of his entire disgusting degenerate life he'd led. So he gets out, he gets a huge settlement, and then he goes back to his junkyard, lures a woman out there by saying he's going to list an ad, uh, kills her, burns her body in his fire pit, disposes of her car on his property, and then, of course, they find her remains in the fire pit. They find the car on his property. His nephew, who is slow, claims he helped kill her, dispose of the body. There's a ton of evidence. And basically, even on the show, the case is thin. They're saying, well, the police had an issue with him because he got a big settlement from the police department. And, they were supposed to, and yeah, they were supposed to step back and let the state authorities handle it. And of course, they didn't want to, because it's their city, and being told you can't work the biggest murder that's ever happened in your city is obviously very annoying for the cops. So
Hmm.
they kept getting involved. And so basically their case was the cops planted all this evidence. The cops somehow put the car in his junkyard after the woman who everybody knew was going out to his junkyard to meet him and then disappeared, and was never seen again. Went there. Someone else or one of his family members killed her. And then the police conspired to plant all this evidence to frame him. That's so far fetched. And everybody believed it.
Yeah.
And then there was the Central Park Five thing. And
Yeah. But before we get into the Central Park Five, yeah, I'm not sure what like where things are now with making the murderer, the Stephen, what was his name? Stephen something?
Yes,
Um,
Stephen. Oh no,
yeah. Because I mean, because
I
there
know his
were,
nephew is Brendan Dassey. He had a different name.
yeah.
I think it's going to come to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not
Oh
sure
God.
where. Yeah, I'm not sure where things are now. With that case, because it seems like kind of like you were alluding, like we talked about earlier. There's so much going on, so it's sort of like on to the next story. On to the next one.
You know,
Um,
I didn't look it back up when I was writing the book because I don't talk about that case specifically, but thinking about the handling of the documentary and the way it was covered and the way his lawyer, who probably should have gotten him some kind of plea deal, just taken the best he could have gotten for pleading him guilty. And he went to trial and hinged the trial argument on trying to convince the jury that the police planted all the evidence.
yeah,
And then, of course, inevitably lost. And I thought it was kind of funny how they were trying to portray him as this heroic crusading defense lawyer when he was really doing this incredibly far-fetched Hail Mary, defense that totally didn't work and got his client. I think he's still in prison. I
I
think
would
he was
think so. Yeah.
sentenced to life. I don't think he was
Stephen
sentenced to death.
Avery. Stephen
Stephen
Avery.
Avery, that's right.
Yeah.
Uh, I think maybe the nephew got out. I don't think Avery got out.
Hmm.
Uh, and the nephew, even the nephew, like that started me on Confessions, which also connects to the Central Park Five.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Obviously, the nephew, and they showed snippets of the video. He's not a smart dude. A lot of people who commit serious violent crimes, most people who commit serious violent crimes, are not very smart dudes. And I guess anybody who confesses to the police is in some sense being taken advantage of because it's always a statement against interest to talk to the police.
Yeah. So,
So,
oh, yeah. The go-to is always, I need to see a lawyer. I'm not going to say anything until my lawyer's present. Yeah. So,
so the only reason that you confess is because you're stupid, probably. Uh, so when they showed him obviously being very stupid and thinking he's going to get to go home and watch wrestling if he just tells the cops everything, uh, people felt sorry for him. But like every murderer who has ever confessed is exactly that dumb. Uh, and like I think people don't quite realize like how impulsive and you know unable to anticipate consequences or understand the situation they're in, people who tend to lash out violently can be. So,
yeah.
him,
It's almost either you're incredibly stupid and you murder, or you're a intelligent psychopath, serial killer who actually plans out this shit and figures out a way to cover up your tracks and stuff.
okay, so the intelligent psychopaths actually don't really like exist very much.
Hmm.
Uh, that was really disappointing because I always thought serial killers were like Hannibal Lecter, like there were
Right,
like
right.
real Hannibal Lecters going around. Like uh like Ted Bundy is like the closest thing to Hannibal Lecter. And he was just like a guy, just like a regular guy who was also a serial killer. And that's the genius. Like
Yeah.
being like a regular guy and also being a serial killer
And he was
is
caught
the
too
the
a number of
closest.
times. Yeah.
Oh yeah, is the closest thing to an evil genius. Like these are guys with really sick sexual perversions and incredibly poor impulse control, and in many cases, very uh, low IQs. Uh, like there was a situation where Ted Bundy was in prison, and they were trying to catch the Green River Killer, uh, who turned out to be he was a truck driver who killed a bunch of sex workers, but he was very mentally disabled as well. And they brought in Ted Bundy because they had no idea how to catch a guy who's just like abducting sex workers from truck stops. How do you
Right.
find him? How do you figure out who's doing that? And Ted Bundy very badly wanted to be Hannibal Lecter in that situation. I don't know if he like literally wanted to be Hannibal Lecter, but he wanted to be that guy. I don't know if Silence of the Lambs had come out when that happened. I think it hadn't. I think he was put to death before that. But they brought in Ted Bundy and asked him if he had any suggestions, and he was like, "Oh yes," and then all of his suggestions were super stupid. Uh, he's like, maybe you could have a slasher movie night and the serial killer will show up to watch the slasher movies. That's what Ted Bundy came up with because he had like an IQ of 112. Uh,
He's a midwit, midwit
exactly.
serial killer.
Like genius level for a serial killer is a midwit. That's as good as it gets.
Mhm.
Like the most functional one is like BTK taunting the police by sending cereal box serial killer jokes and then getting caught because he didn't erase his videotapes or something like that. Uh,
Who was that?
something
BTK? Who was that?
Dennis Rader.
Oh, yeah, I'm not that familiar.
He's interesting because he's like one of the very few who was actually able to lead some kind of sort of double life of being a seemingly normal person because most of them were in no respects normal. Like they were obvious weirdos and sickos. But he was like, he had a family, he had a job. Like that's like, that's like this is the peak.
Yeah.
So Dennis Rader and Ted Bundy is like as close to Hannibal as it gets, and it's a big difference. Most of these are just like ravening stickos that you can just see coming down the street or deranged. Uh, like what was his name? The dating game killer. Have you heard of this guy?
Oh, fuck.
Richard
Ramirez?
Richard
Yeah.
Ramirez. Yeah,
Who was creepy as like I remember watching that documentary and watching that clip from the dating game. He's creepy as fuck. Like
yeah.
in every way. Yeah.
And he was arrested multiple times for horrific violent crimes. Yeah. Uh, and he just kept getting off and getting off and getting off because uh, surprisingly they let a lot of really bad guys go and they always have.
Mm.
Uh, but it's not like he's like blending in or that he's some kind of mastermind. He was like, I mean, the woman on the dating game, I mean, I guess she picked him, but as soon as she met him away from the screen, she clocked him and she did not go on the date with him because, he was, an obvious sicko.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you brought up the Central Park Five, who I would like I'd like to remind everybody. I believe four of them appeared at the Democratic National Convention to
Yep.
wide. Uh, they got like a standing ovation. They were there with the Honorable Al Sharpton, and I remember seeing that and being so grossed out and thinking like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like as the Democrats, I was like, what are you doing, bringing these guys up there? And I guess it's because depending on which circles you run in, people see them as five innocent boys who were tricked and confessing and all that. But based on the facts of the case that I've seen and I've heard other people talk about, do deep dives in. Yeah, they did it. They did it. They were part of a gang rape that almost murdered a woman.
So I don't think anybody who's looked deep in it really thinks they're innocent.
Yeah.
A lot of people have not looked at it very closely.
Hmm.
And have just heard snippets of it or have seen like an op-ed about it or something like that. And there's certain facts that are left out. Basically, what happened was a large group of teenagers entered Central Park at the North End. The place where they all entered the park is now called the Gate of the Exonerated. There's a big sign and a commemorative, you know, uh, explainer thing about it
Hmm.
at Central Park on 109th Street. Uh, and they commenced beating up and robbing people. This is
I'm happy. I'm happy you say that, because for everyone to know, everyone needs to know, even if in your world, in your universe, these kids had nothing to do with with the rape. They admittedly were there to beat the shit and rob people, beat the shit out of people and rob them.
this was going on, multiple beatings. Several people were hospitalized. They were chasing down people on bicycles, attacking joggers,
Yeah.
and mugging people for, it was the 80s. So Walkman cassette players and whatever they were carrying. Uh, the same night, a woman was attacked, raped, and beaten within an inch of her life, and then dragged into a wooded area and left there to die. Several of the teenagers who were involved in this group, there were several dozen kids who were doing it, but they arrested, uh, I think they arrested 6, but they ended up charging 5. They put them in interrogation rooms. They did everything very much by the book. They called their parents if they, were under 16. One of them was 15, but had a fake ID and told him he was 16. So they interrogated him without his parents until they found out that he was only 15, and then they called his parents. But they did not ask for lawyers. They all spoke to the police. They implicated each other, and by way of trying to minimize their own guilt, they confessed. They confessed to things. They said, I didn't do this, I just did this.
Yeah.
I didn't rape her, I just groped her. I didn't rape her, I just held her legs.
Yeah, I just held her. I'm glad that you're bringing up that detail, because it's something that I've pointed out to to defenders of those guys, where it's like, oh yeah, no, so he didn't rape her, like he was just holding her legs. He didn't rape her, he was just grabbing her titty. Like, come on. And these are the same people. A lot of these people who are very much a part of the Me Too movement, who consider flirting to be a kind of a form of sexual assault. And then you have guys defending guys who held the women down. So I'm sorry, I'm gonna
No, absolutely
a little amped.
But from a legal and they thought that the same, and they thought, I didn't do it, and they accused each other of things. They accused other people of things. Somebody had raped her, and they had left semen on the body. And even though it was 1989, that was the beginning of DNA testing. So it was not as sophisticated as it was now. They couldn't extract DNA from samples as small as they can now. They weren't able to extract DNA from trace evidence or other things like that. So somebody left enough semen for them to DNA test in 1989. And that person was not one of these suspects. But that evidence was presented at trial. This is the thing most people don't know or don't understand the significance of, I think. That evidence was presented at trial. They said, here are these guys. This is what they were doing this night. This is what they said they did in their statements. There was at least one other person who raped this victim, and we don't know who that person is. And that was before the jury. The jury was aware. They did not think that the semen came from one of these suspects. So they were not subsequently exonerated by this DNA evidence, the discovery that this didn't match them. That did not exclude them, because the prosecution theory of the case was that a number of suspects attacked this victim and participated in the attack. And if you held down her legs while somebody else raped her, you are just as guilty as the person who raped her. That's a very key point that they didn't understand at the time, and I think a lot of people still don't understand today. Holding down her legs while this is going on is not a lesser crime. That is a horrible thing to do, and only a horrible person would do that. But anyway, 13 years later, they had a DNA database where people who were convicted of various sex crimes were added to the DNA database. And this sample that was taken off the victim was matched to it was basically, I don't know if he actually killed any, I think he killed somebody, and he committed a bunch of rapes. So a serial rapist and killer named Matthias Reyes. And when he was connected to the evidence, he was already serving like a life sentence for another horrific attack. And he claimed that he did it alone. So the theory that makes them innocent is, while they were going around beating up joggers and bikers in Central Park, this guy independently attacked this woman. And then when they were caught, they all confessed to attacking the woman and
gave key details. Like one of the guys, like she fought back and scratched the guy in the face. So one guy had a scratch on his face, and then
Yeah.
another guy said, "Look, the one guy, one of the slower, like the slowest mentally of them, was like, basically saying, we were raping her, but I wouldn't hit a woman. Like hitting her was, I mean, that was out of line. It's like it's all on camera,
And I think one of them, before the police even knew, because before she had been found, they said, we did the robbery, but we didn't do the murder.
And they were like, and they hadn't even,
they didn't know what they didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
But Reyes said he did it alone. And arguably, that's good enough to vacate the charges. It's a serious sexual assault they committed as juveniles. They've been in for 14 years. I mean, I can see why you would say, all right, we will, based on this new evidence, we'll vacate the convictions, we'll let him out. But what happened afterwards, when they were released, Bloomberg was mayor. And they sued the city, and Bloomberg said the city did absolutely nothing wrong. This case was prosecuted by the book. None of your rights were violated. You were convicted. You were clearly committing crimes that night. We don't know you were innocent, and you're probably not. But even if you are, none of your rights were violated. And, there was very strong reason for us to believe that you were responsible for this. He refused to settle with him. When Bill de Blasio ran for mayor, he promised to settle that case as a campaign promise to get support from Al Sharpton. And then he settled the case for $40 million. So I guess once de Blasio settled the case for $40 million, people thought, wow, well, if the city thought that they deserved $40 million, then there must have been a real major miscarriage of justice here. But what happened was it was just a political payout of public money from de Blasio to a key supporter. It was a political favor. That case never should have been settled. They would not have prevailed at trial because maybe not beyond a reasonable doubt, with Reyes saying he did it on his own. Maybe you can't get beyond a reasonable doubt. Maybe it's a reasonable doubt that Reyes independently committed this horrific attack and caused these terrible wounds that, police certainly believed a large number of attackers inflicted. That the head wounds that certainly matched the pipe that one of these kids was going around bashing people with. But
Daniel, at the very least, though, you would be able to put Reyes on the stand, right? You'd be able to, and you'd be able to cross-examine him and be like, wait a minute, now hold on a second, Reyes. Now, what relationships do you have with, either, these, the guilty, the five, or, anybody adjacent to them? What do you have to gain from this? But apparently that never even happened, right?
I mean, they would have had to have decided to try them again, which, right. I mean, the whole point of the city and the prosecutor's office not opposing their appeals was that they weren't going to try them again. So sometimes they'll vacate a conviction for some reason and they'll try somebody again. But when the prosecutors are supporting it, they're not. But they were never exonerated. There has never been like a factual finding that they were innocent. And there has certainly never been any sort of factual finding of wrongdoing by police or prosecutors in that case, which brings us to Netflix, I guess. Do you know what happened with Netflix?
Well, they had a series, right? And all I know, so I never watched the series, but somebody on X had pointed out that they did something really interesting when it came to casting at least one of the characters, where one of the characters cast was a very tiny African-American boy. And then the person he was supposed to be portraying was actually like a really big kid. So even that cast, the way the casting was something that was, they were obviously trying to play to an audience.
Like the way they obviously portray people in cases that are used to foment viral outrage is always, a little bit different. Like the most commonly circulated picture of Trayvon Martin was from when he was 11 years old, but he was 17 and much larger and different looking. so it's very hard to imagine the little kid who you see in the picture.
Right.
With the Netflix documentary, or it wasn't a documentary, it was a dramatization.
Yeah.
So it was a scripted, written series from a particular perspective. Now, this case had been covered in actual news media extensively. And while the news media had called them exonerated, which technically did not happen, it had been fairly balanced in its treatment of the police and the prosecutors. There was a documentary about it that was very popular, that was fact based, and then there was this drama. It was this miniseries that was scripted and drama, fictionalized, and they portrayed the prosecutors as racist and motivated by racial animus to frame these kids. And as a result, one of the prosecutors was a lecturer at Columbia, and she was fired by Columbia. Linda Fairstein was a crime writer. She'd written like 15 crime novels since retiring from the prosecutor's office. She was very, very, well known. She was considered like a trailblazing feminist icon. She founded the Special Victims Unit, and that series, Law and Order SVU, was in part based on her. She was a consultant on it for many years. She prosecuted the Preppy killer. She tremendously was a champion of victims of sexual violence in New York for all of her years as a prosecutor. She was a, well-respected liberal feminist icon. And then they had Felicity Huffman play her as like a ravening boss hog racist in this Netflix series. And she was removed from like a couple of corporate boards she was on. Her publisher canceled her series. She was set to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from Mystery Writers of America, and after they had announced that she was getting it, they revoked it. She was canceled over this, despite the fact that there was absolutely no factual finding that she had ever done anything wrong, because she was fictionally portrayed as someone who had done something wrong. Her reputation was completely destroyed. And, so as much as the crimes, I was interested in the way they're talked about in media and what they tell you and what they don't tell you and the way they try and shape facts into a narrative. So I guess when I was writing that book, a big part of the story was, what's the story this journalist is trying to tell about this death penalty case? And then what's the story the detective is telling about it? And whose version of the story is going to prevail? And I mean, on one hand, you have the power of the state that's moving towards executing the guy. And on the other hand, you have the power of, the media, which is really trying to change the story. And so that's kind of what's going on in Running Out of Road. And that's what I was thinking about. So it's not about any of those cases or any of those real cases. It's about a fictional death penalty case. But then, I was also interested because the death penalty is a kind of storytelling on its own.
Yeah.
And the progression of how we execute people was interesting to me over time, because we used to execute a lot more people, and the way we used to execute people was hanging them. And the reason we used to hang people is because it worked.
Yeah.
But, what we wanted to do, especially moving into the second half of the 20th century, I mean, but even they were trying to find ways. It's watching someone get hanged is distressing. It's a very conspicuously violent thing to do. So is the firing squad. And so,
which was recently used. An inmate had chosen to be put to death by firing squad as opposed to lethal injection, because I think the previous inmate who had been killed via lethal injection had suffered considerably.
I would make the same choice in that situation.
Yeah.
Then we wanted a execution method that didn't look like an act of violence. But you can't kill somebody without an act of violence. So an execution is implicitly an act of violence. So they tried electrocution for a while. They thought it would look like flipping off a light switch, leave the body intact. There's a smell.
I
You know,
bet. Yeah.
it's and when it goes badly in a very conspicuous and
I thought you were going to
unpleasant
say.
way.
I thought you were going to say there's a smell. It's delicious.
Uh, I'm Jewish. I don't eat pork.
Yeah, there we go. You keep kosher. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, uh, I think, yeah, but no, it's yes, unpleasant smell of burning flesh, in an electrocution. I mean, sometimes a couple of second jolt and then the person, you know, in some cases it has looked like flipping off the switch. In some cases, people have caught on fire. So
Right.
electrocution wasn't great. And from that, they progressed to, I mean, they tried, you know, asphyxiation chambers and gas chambers a couple of times, but they moved on to lethal injection. And they like lethal injection because it looks like a medical procedure. And what they want it to look like. So they're designing the execution not based on what is the fastest, most painless, most humane way to kill a person, or uh, I should say a large mammal, because we have other mechanisms for killing a large mammal that are much more effective, and I'll get to that in a second. But what is the not the fastest, most humane, most painless way to kill a person, but what is the way to kill a person that looks least like an act of violence, that looks like a medical procedure, that looks like someone just going to sleep and not waking up? And so what they came up with was the lethal injection, which is a 3-shot process. So first, they inject you with a sedative that makes you go to sleep. Then they inject you with a muscle relaxant. That's the second drug. The muscle relaxant prevents you from moving around or twitching or anything like that. When they administer the third drug, which is typically potassium, and that stops your heart, uh, or you could say melts your heart, or you could say inflicts massive chemical burns throughout your internal organs.
Oh wow.
Uh, so yes, death by potassium injection, potassium chloride, uh, not a pleasant way to go. And medical professionals, even though it's supposed to look like a medical procedure, won't participate in it. Uh, so the needle is inserted often by someone who's not a trained phlebotomist, and these are death row inmates. So, like, you think about guys in prison, like working out and whatever, keeping in good shape. But guys on death row, they sit for like 30 years and they're in solitary pretty much 23 hours a day. So they are not in good health. A lot of times they're older because the process goes on so long before they're executed. So their veins are weak and easily. So basically, the veins will burst or the needle will go through the vein. And then you get the drugs infiltrating into the flesh of the arm rather than infiltrating the bloodstream.
Oof.
So what's interesting is if the sedative doesn't get into your bloodstream, you don't fall asleep.
Hmm.
If the muscle relaxant doesn't get into your bloodstream, it'll still paralyze you because it's a powerful, powerful drug. And this is a drug that, when it's used in therapeutic settings, it's used in anesthesia to keep you from moving while they're performing surgery on you. So that's what keeps you still while they're performing surgery on you. But when you're performing surgery, you're on a ventilator because the muscle relaxant that paralyzes your skeletal muscles also paralyzes the muscles that control respiration.
The diaphragm.
So you will suffocate from not being able to breathe from the muscle relaxant. So that will kill you very slowly by asphyxiation, unless you are killed quickly by the potassium. But if the potassium infiltrates, instead of going into your bloodstream and melting your heart, it'll just go into your arm and melt your arm. So there have been lethal injection executions where someone died from suffocation from the muscle relaxant while the potassium just melted their arm. Uh, a- and so the success rate uh, of hanging is 99%. 99% of the time, when you hang somebody, more than 99%, I think, when you hang somebody, they drop, their neck snaps, they die. It's very quick. Hanging is the same as decapitation, really. It just leaves the soft flesh intact, so the head is nominally intact, but it severs everything in the neck, and the brain dies in a second and a fraction, or less than a second. It's very quick. Like, as long as your head is alive in the bucket after your guillotine, that's how long you can survive after your neck is snapped by hanging. So that's a very quick death. The firing squad is even faster and even more effective. You're dead faster than the speed of sound. You don't hear the shot before you die. And
oh yeah, because
we
you're
have
so close. The distance between the shooter and you are so close.
Yep, and we have, in fact, the thing that the firing squad and the lethal injection have in common is instantaneous destruction of the brain through massive trauma. And not coincidentally, that's the same way we slaughter livestock most of the time. If you've seen No Country for Old Men, the pneumatic gun that they use to
Oh yeah,
slaughter cows and pigs, and doing that has to be as quick and painless as possible, because if they die slowly or in pain, they secrete
is it
a hormone.
cortisol or adrenaline or?
I think it might be adrenaline, or it might be something else, but they secrete a hormone that tastes unpleasant in the meat. So they don't want that. So they have to instantly destroy. So we know how to do it. There are guys who just stand there and do it 100 times a day. And yet we do this complicated lethal injection procedure when we want to put down a human, because we're trying to engineer a performance of he went to sleep and didn't wake up. And to try to create that, we've created this needlessly complex process with multiple failure points to conceal what we're actually doing. It just, in addition to being cruel and unusual, which it almost certainly is, it's just dishonest.
Yeah.
I mean, this person is a murderer, so we're going to kill them. And it's, it is a violent reprisal. It is retribution. And like, I think if we can't handle that, I don't know, we shouldn't do it that way. So I absolutely support firing squads over lethal injections. I think the lethal injection is a very disturbing, what it says about society that we've decided to create that procedure, what it says about our priorities, that out of all the ways we could execute a killer, that's the one we've chosen. It's not good.
Yeah. One thing before I let you go, I wanted to talk to you about, as you're doing your research on, so many of these topics, but what I'm really wondering about is sort of the minds of the activists who, come to the defense of, convicted murderers who are obviously guilty. Because it's something that, but one of the, I think I still consider myself, like, to a point, against the death penalty. I used to be a lot more, vocal about it, but something that I find is, at least in recent years, like, the cases that people are bringing up, I'm like, oh man, if you're trying to make a case like against the death penalty, you're bringing up the guy who murdered like 3 children and raped their corpses. Like, can you find the innocent guy, please? Can we get to, can you find the innocent guy who was put to death, and then, get our heartstring, pull on our heartstrings, as opposed to this fucking monster,
I mean, I guess the argument against the death penalty is you never know which one is the innocent guy. They all seem like monsters. A lot of times, people who are innocent of a particular horrific crime they're falsely convicted of, like Stephen Avery, are bad people who've done other very bad things. So it's hard to. A lot of times, they are people who can't effectively advocate for themselves. And there are people who can't effectively advocate for themselves who are very guilty, because the same kind of people who tend to commit these horrific crimes tend to be people who can't advocate for themselves very well. But then also there are people who can't advocate for themselves very well who did not commit horrific crimes. So the death penalty is very final and irrevocable. You can't compensate somebody for being dead. You know, you can't really compensate somebody for being falsely imprisoned for a long period of time. But there's an acknowledgement that and I think it's happening less and less as our system gets more sophisticated. Criminal convictions rely less and less on like eyewitness testimony than they used to. So the failure points, I think, that resulted in innocent people being falsely convicted are becoming less common, but it can always happen. And I guess you never know which one it is. Obviously, there's a horrible crime. Uh, the one I think of is the West Memphis Three. Uh, some people still think they're guilty too. I not as familiar with it, but I was reasonably persuaded by what I've seen, and maybe there's something I haven't seen. I haven't gone super deep into it, but it appears that they were innocent. Uh, Basically, there were three teenagers who were sort of social outsiders. They listened to a lot of heavy metal, and they, it was during the Satanic Panic, and there was a murder, and they claimed it was a satanic ritual murder, and it turned out that the body had been dumped in a marsh, and what they claimed at the trial was satanic ritual abuse was actually the body being gnawed on by turtles. And these three kids were convicted, and then they were later vacated and released. And I think most people think that one they were persuasively exonerated. Uh, and the guy Damien Eccles, uh, he was in solitary confinement for so long under fluorescent lights staring at a white wall that it damaged his eyes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I heard him talk on a podcast. He's kind of crazy. I mean, which maybe he was before and maybe he went after, I don't know, but he thinks he's like a wizard or something. I don't know. But I mean, if he's innocent, and I think more likely than not he's innocent. Uh I mean, he went. What he went through was pretty horrible. So and he was sentenced to death before he was released. So he could have been, he could have been falsely executed, and the crime was horrific. It was murder of a child, and the reason that it was such a cause for national attention was that they thought it was the murder of a child in a satanic ritual, which I'm pretty certain it wasn't. So I mean, it can happen, and the possible innocent person is the best argument against the death penalty. But I think people frame it as compassion too often for people who are obviously guilty.
Hmm.
These guys, even if they're innocent, a lot of times they've done some bad stuff in their lives to end up in that place where people thought they were the guy. They're not necessarily heroic figures. Uh, I mean, I think, yeah, you wanted to talk about there was a poem in the New
Yeah.
York Review of Books.
Oh, man. Yeah. If you could just explain that. Yeah.
Okay, so this poet, he took the last statements of a bunch of executed murderers, and he put a poem together that was meant to, you know, bring sympathy to the condemned. It made them seem sad or, thoughtful or remorseful. In many cases, like I said, the killers themselves are not smart guys. He took these statements, uh, and so, like I said, when we're talking about the Central Park Five, as much as we're talking about them and what they did, we need to talk about the documentaries and especially the dramatization and the impact that had on misleading people. Far more interesting than the murder in Making a Murder, which was very straightforward, was the way they shaped it with the documentary. Uh, so this is like very straightforward, and that he took a statement where somebody is taunting his victims' families They take a line out of context from that and make it seem like, you know, to try and portray this person as sympathetic, knowing that this single line taken out of the context of the statement, which is horrible, taken out of the context of the crime, which is horrible, and the life of the person who committed it, which is horrible. This single out of context statement creates an entirely different perspective on what you think about this person and what the state's doing to him. And when you are creating this document, this poem, and you have access to all of this context and data, and you choose to omit it for a purpose, I mean, it's intentionally misleading, is my view. So, I mean, that's, you know, I mean, I'm not necessarily against the death penalty, but I'm not necessarily for it either. I think if all these guys, as horrible as what they did, is, if they were given life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in a supermax prison, that's not an injustice. That's, you know, that's a punishment. That's suitable. So, you know, I don't have a problem with us having it. If we didn't have it, you know, we could still punish them adequately. But the lionization of these figures is deeply offensive.
Yeah, 100%. Daniel, thank you so much for giving me your time. And one more time, what's the latest book called?
The most recent one is Running Out of Road. That's the one about the death penalty. So yeah, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll definitely link. I'll be linking to all your material. Yeah, and I hope more people check out your stuff and follow you on the socials. I really appreciate.
Well, thank you for having me on. This was
right on, man.
Really enjoyable.
Cool.
All right, nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too.